It was shared with me by one of our older coaches, and he said there was a big game back in the day against NCCU.
In order to break some of these racial barriers, he thought up having the secret game.
Since it was illegal and there was always the possibility of violence if that game would have been found out.
Johnny was impressed by seeing the other young boys, he was about the age of 11 or 12, play basketball, and he told his dad that's what he wanted to do.
John B. McLendon, as the last and only African-American protege to the inventor of basketball, Dr. James Naismith.
So he came to the University of Kansas in 1932 as a college freshman, and he wanted to major in physical education. He was the first African-American student in the PE program.
Basketball was McLendon's life. He specifically chose Kansas so he could study directly under the man who invented the game, James Naismith.
And he went to Dr. Naismith's office and he said, "I've been told that you're going to be my advisor." Well, McLendon said that Naismith became much more than an advisor to him. He truly became a mentor. And we're talking about a man in his early 70s, and John McLendon, an African-American student, the age of 18. And they became very close together. They became friends. But he understood even at a young age that sports could be an avenue to improve the lives of people and to bring about social change, especially in regards to civil rights.
From Naismith, McLendon inherited a legacy, one that he would carry with him to his first coaching job in Durham at the North Carolina College for Negroes, what would later become North Carolina Central University.
John McLendon became the basketball coach in 1941. And there was a fear by many of going to the southern part of the United States.
In 1944, a black veteran, right, was shot and killed during an incident on a local Durham bus with a white bus driver. So the fear of violence and threat for African Americans was real in Durham, North Carolina.
Basketball before McLendon, way before my time, but when I watch videos, there was a very systematic approach.
It was more of a stand-around game, and you're passing the ball, and there wasn't a whole lot of movement.
It was more of a half-court game, a lot of passes.
We're talking about a time in which there was no clock in basketball. There was no 24-second clock, and teams would just slow it down as much as possible.
Four corners, those type of offenses, pass and cut. And you do see that today, but it wasn't as much pushing the ball up the floor. You didn't see the press like you do today, where they are pushing up against offenses at 94 feet, trying to get quick scores in fast-paced basketball with the break.
The break, the fast break, was one of McLendon's greatest contributions to the sport.
But what John McLendon told me is that he and Dr. Naismith were walking in Lawrence one day, and they saw a bunch of kids playing a basketball game. Naismith said, "John, look at this. Look at the kids, the way they play basketball. One child has the basketball. Everyone runs toward that child. That's the way the game is supposed to be played. It's one part of the court to the other part of the court. It's constant motion. You follow the basketball." And although that sounds really rudimentary, that's the basis of the fast break. And John McLendon uses the fast break, and he begins to figure this out even when he was a young coach in North Carolina. It needs to be scientific principles. Everyone needs to know where each of his fellow players is going to be on the court.
You better be ready to run. Once you got a rebound, I'm sure he wanted a shot to be taken within 8 seconds.
So John McLendon spends literally his life perfecting the fast break. When he goes to North Carolina, they start employing the fast break. And his teams from 1941 on are using the fast break, and they are scoring in the 80s, sometimes 100. One of his teams score against Shaw University at the time. They score 150 points. It's unbelievable. I mean, no one could even consider that a possibility at the time.
McLendon pushed his team hard. Early morning drills, endurance training, all toward making them into one of the fastest college teams anyone had ever seen. They were unstoppable.
He also was using basketball as a way to instill confidence and manhood in young Black men. He wanted them to know their worth.
Dignity was incredibly important to John McLendon as a coach and as a man. And he wanted to instill that in his players.
They just thought there was nobody like him. They just idolized Johnny.
They had a lot of respect for him.
So John McLendon was a very mild-mannered man. Never once had a technical foul called on him. John McLendon had an iron fist and a velvet glove because he knew what he wanted and he got the best out of his players.
By 1944, McLendon and his teams had already established themselves within the CIAA, the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association, or then the Colored Intercollegiate Athletic Association. So McLendon was in many ways looking to give his players experience beyond Black college basketball to be able to compete against white college basketball teams.
And it just so happened that right across town, another undefeated team was also looking for more formidable opponents.
Durham, the home of Duke University, one of the most heavily endowed schools in the United States.
By the outbreak of World War II, Duke had itself become a hotbed for basketball talent, and they were even building a new stadium to support the growing popularity of the sport. The Duke team was known for their exceptional athleticism and strategic play. They dominated their opponents with a combination of precision and intensity. But they had heard rumors of a newer, faster style of play, and they were more than curious.
The North Carolina players would attend some clandestine YMCA meetings with players from Duke University. And one of the Duke players starts boasting about their intramural team. They said they were the best team in North Carolina, and one of the North Carolina college players hears this, and he says, well, you may think that, but you haven't played the North Carolina College for Negroes team.
It was the chance McLendon had been waiting for to stand up against Jim Crow. But he'd not only be putting his career in jeopardy, he'd be risking the safety of his team, so he initially tabled the idea. But when he overheard one of his players expressing doubt they could ever beat a white team, McLendon reconsidered.
So the only way to do it was to keep it extraordinarily secret.
We will not allow no spectators. It will not be publicized.
He solicited the official for the game, but he also keeps who their opponents are a secret.
And even finding a time to play the game when no one else was around.
On a Sunday morning. And we're going to do it on a Sunday morning because everyone will be in church. They come into the court, and so they look at one another, the all-white Duke players, the all-black players from North Carolina College. They look at each other, and it's almost surreal at the time. Although McLendon says we'll have no spectators, he allows his two young children and his wife to be there. And I asked him once why he did that when he said it's going to be no one's there except the players and the coaches and the referees. And he said, because we're making history.
McLendon locked the doors and blocked the windows to ensure their presence remained undetected. Inside the gym, the tension was palpable. The Eagles were anxious. While a few of them had played against white opponents before, most of them had never even touched a white person. The Duke players were likewise on edge, but they were quick to regain their composure. took an early lead, capitalizing on the Eagles' nerves. The NC college players left too much space and gave Duke opportunities they would normally have denied. They weren't playing their usual aggressive game.
They lead into the game with those nerves, with those fears, with those apprehensions, the what ifs. What happens if I bump into this white player? How is that player going to respond?
This was a moment where their worst fears seemed to come true. But the official blew his whistle and play continued. It was just a normal game.
But then the North Carolina players gave a timeout.
John McLendon has reminded them that they are in peak condition to actually succeed in this particular game.
And McLendon says, do you know, this is a game of basketball. You know how to play basketball. These are players just like you. Just play basketball. Just do the fast break.
Central players, once they figured that they could play with the Duke players, they kind of ran away with this.
You read from the interviews of the players who played, they started to realize that they have met their match.
Double the score of the Duke players. So it's 88-44. But what's really important is that this is a life lesson. This is a turning point for the players and for the coach. After the official game, John McLendon has another idea, and he wants to instill something else in the players. So he has them play shirts and skins, and they have mixed teams. And if you think about it, symbolically, shirts and skins, literally to take their shirts off, to show the color of each of their skins, white and black. And so they're integrating in the most visible, symbolic way possible. And afterwards, they go to the student dorms in North Carolina. The Duke players come there, and they're just young people sharing lives together and talking about their college experience. And the players say what they've told him, and he told me and others, is that the players say it was really a life-changing experiment.
Outside the gym that day, things went on as they always had. But for one moment, these college athletes and a young coach were the first to get a glimpse of a new kind of basketball and a new kind of America.
And maybe they realized it at the time, maybe they realized it days or even weeks or maybe years later, but it really changed their perceptions of one another. And the best quote is from that experiment was by George Parks, which is one of the North Carolina players. And what he says, it's just God's children horsing around with a basketball. That's all it was. God's children horsing around with a basketball.